Spring Fling. Hello, welcome to Get Gardening. I'm Alan Gray. Now, spring is that time of the year that fills everyone with optimism, and it starts here really with a collection of magnolias. So thanks to those people that visited the Himalayas, or should I say the Himalayas, and brought back all these wonderful plants, we have quite a collection in the garden at the moment. And they span quite a few weeks because there's the early flowering ones, the middle flowering ones, and then the later flowering ones. One of the things about magnolias is that often the early flowering varieties, they have their flowers frosted. You know, when you get them, they've got little brown edges to the petals. So that's because they open very, very early. But if you spread your load, if you've got a smaller garden than I've got, have 3 varieties, an early, a mid-season and a late, and you'll definitely get flowers. And just look at the selection that we have here. As you see, there are numerous varieties. So really you can be spoilt for choice, but I think the most popular varieties, the pure white ones, they always show the brown colouring on their petals if they do get frosted. That's a warning to you. And probably these pink ones here, they're kind of mid-pinks, but you know, the older I get and the more disgruntled I become, I rather like the very dark flowering ones. Come and have a look at this. Now this is a variety that's called Magnolia Vulcan. It was the name of a bomber when I was a boy, but I mean, just look at this. Isn't it a fantastic plant? The great thing about magnolias, when they get big enough, you can cut branches just as the buds are breaking, take them into the house and they'll flower. And you can guarantee the flowers when they open in the house will be absolutely perfect. But hey, I'm kind of loath to cut them because I'd rather leave them here. Just look at this. Isn't it a fantastic display? This is one of the smaller growing magnolias, but you can see here it's not exactly small. It's still quite tall for most people's gardens, but there's an awful lot of breeding that's been done today, crossing this magnolia, which is Magnolia stellata because it has star-shaped flowers, with other magnolias so that they can breed them so that they get their height down, so that they maintain a height that's suitable for much smaller gardens. I haven't tried them yet, but I'm going to because I ordered a half a dozen the other day just to see what they're like. At this time of the year, you know, we quite often get pheasants in the garden, and it reminds me of this shrub here, which was Mahonia aquifolium, because Mahonia aquifolium used to be used as shelter for game underneath woodland, fairly light woodland, open woodland, so you get a little bit of sunlight coming through. But the great thing with this is it makes a most marvellous garden plant because, in actual fact, not only is it bright and breezy, it's also sweet and smelly. Camellias. Everyone loves camellias, except Christo Lloyd, who actually hated them because he thought their blobs of colour were vulgar. And I know what he meant when I look at this. But, you know, you have to sort of think to yourself that this kind of plant is going to saturate your garden with masses of colour. And you really want something that will tone it down, that will act as a foil for it. And here it is in front of you. This is Euphorbia wolfenii. This is not a posh variety. Well, maybe it is, because it's a seedling from a variety named after a gardener called Jimmy Platt. And Jimmy Platt was a very good gardener, and the Euphorbia wolfenii that's named after him is a very good plant. This is a son or a daughter. It will be genetically quite different from the parent, but nevertheless, it's got good genes. Not all things in the spring garden are as showy as camellias, of course, but this little chap here is rather special. It's called Stachyurus praecox. This is a name variety, and it's been bred to have more flowers per stem than the plain old praecox. But don't you think it's lovely? Lime green, again, a great leavener, but also these lovely little bells, almost like lily of the valley, this time unscented. This is an area that's known as the Perfume Corridor, between 2 tall hedges, and it's planted with very smelly plants in a good way. And the idea is that the tall hedges will trap the scent, and on a warm day, this Edgeworthia here, that's Edgeworthia chrysantha, perfumes the whole area. It's underplanted with a mixture of hyacinths. There's skimmias in here. How many people realise that skimmias have the fabulous scent in early spring? And there's some Daphne bholua, Jacqueline Postill, and Daphne bholua seedlings that we've raised here as well. And so that means that this whole area is crammed full of swooningly scented plants. Helleborus foetidus. Foetidus brings to mind that it's smelly in some way, but it's really only smelly if you bruise the foliage, and it has a kind of fox-like scent. But this is one of my favourites here, and I remember when we planted this about 30 years ago, it was called Helleborus corsicus. It's now Helleborus argutifolius. And in actual fact, it started a fascination of a lifetime for me of plants that actually have green flowers. Today, these are absolutely fabulous. And again, remember that lime green is a great foil for other colours in the garden. What could be more spring-like than primroses and violets? This is a regular coloured violet, a violet in actual fact. But the primrose is a primrose called Primula subthorpii, with these absolutely fabulous single mauve flowers with a little bright yellow and lime green pin eye. We have the ordinary primrose in the garden, of course, but I also have a collection of old-fashioned primroses, and this is not a primrose. This is actually a Margot. But she just comes to say hello. A spring shop with scillas and hyacinths. Now if you look around here, you'll see that my hyacinths are in a real jumble of colours. But the great thing is, if you have hyacinths in a bowl in your house and you let them finish growing and you then plant them outside, they will be with you for many, many years to come. In actual fact, we've got hyacinths in the garden here that I planted from a bowl that we had in the house over 30 years ago, and they're still flowering today. And the great compliment, of course, is these wonderful hellebores here. This is a variety called Penny's Pink. It's almost a dark maroon red, but you can see that if you actually take the old leaves away just as the flowers are coming up, you get to see the flowers so much better. And these newly bred strains of Helleborus orientalis, they really do stand tall, proud, and absolutely fantastic. I wouldn't be without them, because their petals are not actually petals. They're sepals, which are modified leaves. They're almost bracteose in texture. So it means that they last in flower probably for about 4 months. And then they drop their seed. And if you want to collect it, you can collect it and sow it fresh. It will probably germinate next spring for you. Or you can leave it to fall where it is, and then you can harvest the seedlings, just like we do. But do remember that the seedlings may be very different from the parent. I'm not usually a great fan of these. They're known as Orchid Narcissi. They're the trumpet, in actual fact, is split and it's drawn back into segments. So you've got your petals, and then you've got another layer of petals above them. And sometimes they come in the most extraordinary, or should I say excruciating colour combinations. But this one I rather like. Cream and yellow. And to me it looks good enough to eat. Or should I say drink? Its name? Banana daiquiri. Now who'd have thought that? This little gem here has been flowering, probably since November last year, and we're now into April. That's a good long time. In actual fact, it's from the other side of the world. It comes from Australia and New Zealand, and it's known as a Correa. And it's really not a climbing shrub. It's against the wall here because I wanted to give it as much shelter as I possibly can. It's very scandent in its growth, which means it's floppy, so it's ideal against the wall, because any wayward branches, you can just tie them in to tidy it up. But I think that is fantastic, and you can get these in other colours, but for length of flowering, it's just absolutely stunning. From the wonderful to the completely weird, this is a woodlander, and it comes from a big old corm underground, and it's called an aracema. You can see it's very reptilian, with its striped stem and its head that curls over the top, rather like a cobra. It's followed by huge leaves, but this spathe here will actually give way to an enormous seed head packed with bright red seeds in the autumn. It's one of those plants that just gets curiouser and curiouser and curiouser. This, full of racemes of bright purple pea flowers. It shouldn't grow here really. It's an Australian native, and it's a kind of conservatory plant, and that's where I had it, in my conservatory. But it got too big, so 2 years ago I planted it out here against this shelter south-facing wall. And this winter has been quite hard, and if you look carefully at the leaves, you can see that some of the leaves have been damaged by a bit of frost. But I still think there's quite a display of flowers here that makes it well worthwhile. So if you've got a plant that's growing in your conservatory and it gets too big, don't throw it away. dig it into the garden. You never know. If it lives 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, that's a bonus. And if you'd have thrown it away, you'd have lost that bonus. Camellias come in all colours, from whites, pinks, through to the darkest reds. But this is a mid-pink variety, and this is a rather interesting one because it's a white flower with petals that have a pink pickety edge that bleed into the flower. But the interesting thing is that both of these are growing on the same plant. So, what's happened? Well, this is something that's peculiar to lots of plants. I mean, pelargoniums do it as well. And that's where one branch suddenly becomes another colour. And it's called a sport. So whether this is a sport of this, or the pink is a sport of the pink and white, I don't know. But if I took a cutting of this pink one, it would stay pink. And if I take a cutting of the pink and white one, it will stay pink and white until it sports. Why does it do that? Nobody knows. Just a quirk. In the garden here at East Ruston, we don't do much in the way of bedding. But this particular border, known as the autumn border, because that's when it has its climax, we've got a ribbon of bedding along the front. And to give it interest in the early spring, I've gone back to one of my grandmother's favourites, polyanthus. Now, polyanthus have been bred today to have huge flowers on them, and she would have loved that. I personally don't. I like them when they're slightly smaller and slightly more natural looking. But I've chosen colours which I hope are not too garish. We have yellow and we have cream together. One of the things that probably people don't realise about polyanthus is that they are exceedingly well scented. And on a day like today, when the sun is coming and going, you can actually smell them on the air. But you do need quite a number of them. And you can see on the border here we have a ribbon. And of course they're helped in the scent department by hyacinths. If you're buying hyacinths for the garden, don't buy the great big fat expensive bulbs. Go to a bulb merchant where they sell them by size and by the smallest size, because that will produce a smaller flower spike. But the great thing is that in the garden it won't flop over and lay its head in the mud. It will stand upright, which is really what you want. If you look at hyacinths that you've had in the house and you planted in the garden, you look at them 3 or 4 years later and you'll see the spikes are so much smaller, which makes them ideal for garden use. Isn't this an absolute little darling? It's a prunus, a cherry. And it's called Prunus Kojo-no-mai. It's a lovely little thing, but it has a very sort of strange habit of growth, almost zigzag, a lazy zigzag, shall we say. And you can see it here on this dead twig I've just pulled off. It goes zig-zag, zig-zag, zig-zag. Absolutely lovely. Very pale pink, almost white flowers with a little deep pink eye. Absolutely charming. A little plant that flowers throughout the winter called Coronilla glauca variety citrina. And that's because it has these wonderful pale limey yellow flowers. There's a variety which has bright yellow flowers, but this is, shall we say, quite slightly smarter. The great thing is, like most plants that flower in the winter, it's got a very sharp and very sweet scent. And you can just, lemons, I think. A touch of lime, maybe. I don't know, but it's absolutely gorgeous. A member of the pea family, very easy to grow in a sheltered place. It's been flowering out here since 2020, and we're now in 2021, in April. So it's a long flowering period, worth having. You know, this is a plant that I don't think is used widely enough. It's known as the snowflake as opposed to the snowdrop, and it's a Leucojum. And this is Leucojum aestivum, and this variety is called Gravetye Giant because it's slightly bigger than the normal type. But just look at those lovely flowers. They're little pendant, almost like little lampshades, and each of the petals is flicked back with a touch of green on the edge. And if you look inside, you'll see the most lovely little pale orange stamens. Isn't that just a joy? I think I feel an urge coming on to plant a drift of them next year. Maybe 100 or 2. Don't you think that would be good? It is Leucojum. Camellias come in all colours, from pinks, from pure whites. Sorry. Camellias come in all colours, from pink. There's an area of the garden that's called the scented. No, it's not. This is a super scented area of the garden known as the Perfume Corridor. Hello, good girl. It's all right, sit still. East Ruston. But in this autumn border here, we have a... Hey, shush!